Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 16th of September 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now the first article appears as a lead article on page number 10. The title of the article is Why India's Growth Figures Are Off the Mark. This particular article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Economy under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. As you all must be aware, presently the Indian economy is facing the economic slowdown. This is evident in the fact that the quarterly GDP growth rates in the Indian economy in the last 5 quarters, they have declined from 8% to 5%. On the other hand, the official GDP estimates for the financial year 2019-20, according to the Economic Survey, as well as the international organizations such as the Asian Development Bank, as well as the International Monetary Fund, the Indian economy is expected to grow at around 7%. Whereas according to the RBI, the Indian economy is expected to grow at 6.9% for the financial year 2019-20. So in case of India, we can see that the official estimates of the GDP growth rate predicted by various agencies do not correspond to the ground realities, since the GDP growth rate in the last 5 quarters has got reduced to around 5%. Hence, there is a growing divergence between the official GDP estimates and the actual GDP growth rates of the Indian economy. Now, why this divergence raises concerns is because even before the 2007-8 financial crisis, international organizations such as IMF had failed to correctly predict the financial crisis. For the financial year 2007-8, the IMF had predicted that the world economy would expand. However, subsequent to the forecast of the IMF, the global economy slipped into the recession. It is against this particular backdrop, this particular lead article here highlights the various flaws in the GDP estimation, and this particular flaw in the GDP estimation is mainly on account of the methodology which has been adopted by these agencies in order to calculate the contribution of the unorganized sector. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand as to how the GDP is estimated for the organized sector as well as the unorganized sector. And secondly, we'll discuss as to what are the flaws in the methodology adopted in order to calculate the contribution of the unorganized sector of the Indian economy. As you all must be aware, the GDP refers to the market value of all the final goods and services produced within the territory of India. This particular GDP is presently calculated by the National Statistical Office, which works under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And presently the base year for calculating GDP is 2011-12. This particular GDP estimation is undertaken both for the organized sector as well as the unorganized sector. With respect to GDP estimation for the organized sector, for this particular GDP estimation, we collect the organized sector data on a monthly, quarterly as well as the annual basis. And based upon this particular data collected for the organized sector, we directly estimate the contribution of the organized sector. For example, with respect to the contribution of the organized sector, we take into account a number of data sets such as the index of industrial production, the financial performance of the companies in the organized sector, wherein we mainly look at the MCA 21 database, which is maintained by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And we also look at the performance of the key sectors of the Indian economy, such as the railways, banking, insurance, government revenue, and so on. Hence, in order to estimate the contribution of the organized sector, we directly estimate its contribution based upon the data which we collect from various sources. When it comes to the GDP estimation of the contribution of the unorganized sector, unlike the data which is collected for the organized sector on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, the data for the unorganized sector activity is collected every 5 years only. This is because we have millions of units in the unorganized sector. And collecting data of millions of units in the unorganized sector may turn into an administrative nightmare. So instead of collecting the data for the unorganized sector on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, we collect the data for the unorganized sector once in 5 years. And once this particular data is collected, we indirectly estimate the contribution of the unorganized sector to India's economy. So the main difference here is when we try to estimate the contribution of the organized sector, we directly estimates its contribution. However, when it comes to the estimation of the unorganized sector activity, we indirectly estimates its contribution. And such an indirect estimation of the contribution of the unorganized sector may take place based upon a number of parameters. For example, we may look at the overall estimate of the agricultural production on an annual basis. So based upon the estimate of the agricultural production, we would be indirectly be able to estimate the annual income of the farmers who work in the unorganized sector. On similar lines, we may also look at the previous contribution of the unorganized sector to the India's GDP. This is particularly when the data was available for the unorganized sector activity 5 years back. Now, for example, if the data related to unorganized sector activity was available in the year 2015-16, then we would use this particular data in order to estimate the GDP contribution of the unorganized sector in the year 2017-18. And this is more of an indirect estimation of the unorganized sector contribution to the India's economy in the year 2017-18. Thirdly, we also assume that the overall unorganized sector activity in the Indian economy is in turn dependent upon the organized sector activity. For instance, if there is increase in the production in the organized sector, then we would assume that the production in the unorganized sector would also increase. Or if the production in the organized sector reduces, then the production in the unorganized sector also reduces. In other words, we use the organized sector activity as a kind of proxy in order to calculate the overall contribution of the unorganized sector to India's economy. So with respect to the contribution of the unorganized sector to India's GDP, you need to note that presently we are not directly estimating the contribution of the unorganized sector to India's GDP. Rather, its contribution is indirectly estimated based upon a number of parameters. And more importantly, please note that such kind of indirect estimation is more of a statistical exercise which is carried out by different agencies in India. So with respect to the indirect estimation of the contribution of the unorganized sector, this particular lead article has raised a number of concerns. Now, according to National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, the overall contribution of the unorganized sector to India's GDP is as high as 50% and it employs around 92% of India's workforce. The article has highlighted that the unorganized sector activity in India has been affected by twin shocks of demonetization and the implementation of the goods and service tax, wherein the demonetization announced by the government of India has led to a liquidity crunch in the unorganized sector, whereas the implementation of the GST has led to increased compliance burden on the smaller industries. And because of these particular twin shocks, the overall activity in the unorganized sector has reduced by almost 10%. And this particular decrease in the unorganized sector activity by 10% is in turn visible in mainly two parameters. First and foremost, there has been increase in the unemployment in India, wherein according to government estimates, the overall unemployment in India has increased to around 6.1%, and this is considered to be highest in the last 45 years. Now this becomes quite important because 92% of India's workforce is presently employed in the unorganized sector. And secondly, there is increase in the demand for the MG Narega works in the rural areas. So an increase in the demand for the MG Narega works in the rural areas essentially means that the people in the rural areas are presently facing the rural distress. So because of the decline in the income levels as well as the increase in the unemployment caused due to the rural distress, more number of people are now enrolling for the works under the MG Narega. Now if you look at the GDP estimation for the unorganized sector, this is estimated based upon the overall estimation of the activity in the organized sector. Now, with respect to demonetization as well as the implementation of GST, the demonetization as well as the GST has affected the organized sector as well as the unorganized sector. However, the organized sector has been able to recover from these twin shocks. However, the unorganized sector has failed to recover from the twin shocks of demonetization and GST. In this regard, this particular article here highlights that we have failed to capture the present slowdown in the unorganized sector activity. This is because we are indirectly estimating the overall contribution of the unorganized sector to India's GDP based upon the overall contribution of the organized sector. And since organized sector as such has not got affected much by the demonetization and GST, we have not been able to capture the present slowdown in the unorganized sector. Accordingly, the article here argues that if we account for the slowdown in the unorganized sector, then the present GDP estimates of 5% would be actually much lower. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Further, based upon a video analysis, a mains question for your practice here could be the over-reliance on the organized sector for calculating the official GDP estimates is flawed and causes gross miscalculation. Discuss. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon a video analysis. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 11. The title of the article is The Litmus Test for the Free Speech. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Indian Constitution. Article 19 of the Indian Constitution provides for a fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression to the Indian citizens. And just like the exercise of other fundamental rights, reasonable restrictions can be imposed on the exercise of the freedom of speech and expression. Now, these reasonable restrictions can be imposed on the grounds of the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with the foreign countries, public order, decency or morality, defamation or incitement to offences. Now this particular article here is about the reasonable restrictions which can be imposed on the exercise of the freedom of speech and expression, wherein this particular article discusses about the various tests laid down by the US Supreme Court to ascertain the validity of the reasonable restrictions which can be imposed on the freedom of speech and expression. The article further compares these tests laid down by the US Supreme Court with the reasonable restrictions laid down by the Indian Supreme Court. Earlier, the Supreme Court in USA had laid down the bad tendency test so as to ascertain the validity of the reasonable restriction on the exercise of the freedom of speech and expression, wherein under the bad tendency test, the fundamental right of speech and expression can be curtailed only when it affects the welfare of the public at large. Subsequently, the bad tendency test was then replaced by a clear and present danger test, wherein according to this particular test, the fundamental right of speech and expression can be curtailed only when there is a clear and present danger either to the state security or to the public order. The clear and present danger test was further widened by the US Supreme Court through the adoption of the imminent lawless action test, wherein according to this particular test, restriction can be imposed on the exercise of free speech only if such an action leads to an imminent lawless action. Now the word imminent here is quite important because it refers to an event or an action which is likely to happen very soon. So it is only when the exercise of free speech lead to a lawless action in the immediate future, only then the exercise of the freedom of speech and expression can be curtailed by the state. Now in case of India, in the Indra Das versus state of Assam, as well as Arup Bhuyan versus state of Assam, even the Indian Supreme Court has adopted the imminent lawless action as a test to check the validity of the reasonable restrictions on the exercise of fundamental right of speech and expression. Now why this becomes important is because if we apply this particular test, an individual cannot be arrested merely on the grounds that his writings may lead to a lawless action in the medium or long-term future. A person can be arrested only when the state is able to prove that his writings may lead to a lawless action in the immediate future. Now in case of India, a large number of activists and journalists have been arrested on the grounds that their writings would disturb the public order and hurt the security of the state. For example, the Naxal sympathizers who have not been involved in any kind of violence against the state have been arrested. Similarly, a large number of tribal rights activists have been booked in the Bhima Koregaon case. And recently, a journalist was booked for publishing an article in the newspaper which stated that the children in the primary school in the Mirzapur district of Uttar Pradesh were getting only roti and salt in the midday meals. Now, in each of these cases, if we apply the imminent lawless action test, then their prosecution can be easily challenged before the Supreme Court. Hence, in this regard, this particular article here highlights that the Supreme Court need to follow the imminent lawless action test in all the cases related to violation of fundamental right of speech and expression. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 1. The title of the article is Saudis to tap the oil reserves after the attack on plants. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Current Events of International Importance. Yemen in West Asia is presently facing its worst political and humanitarian crisis. It is presently involved in a three-way conflict consisting of the Saudi Arabia-led coalition, the Shia Houthi rebels supported by Iran, and the Southern Transition Council, which is backed by UAE. Presently, the Shia Houthi rebels supported by Iran have occupied the Yemen's capital Sana'a. So the Saudi Arabia-led coalition is fighting against the Shia Houthi rebels so as to push back the Houthi rebels from the capital Sana'a. So this particular three-way conflict in Yemen has in turn led to the worst humanitarian crisis, leading to the displacement of a large number of people. Now this particular article here highlights that the Yemen-based Shia Houthi rebels have recently carried out the drone attacks on two major oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. These two major oil facilities are based at Abqaiq and Khurais. Now this is considered to be a major attack carried out by the Shia Houthi rebels because Abqaiq happens to be the world's largest petroleum processing plant. Hence the destruction that is caused to these two major oil facilities is said to reduce Saudi Arabia's oil output by almost around 50%, and this is said to disrupt the global oil supply by more than 5%. And because of this, the international crude oil prices are expected to increase by around $3 to $5 per barrel. Now this particular increase in the international crude oil prices raises concerns for India because India imports almost around 70 to 75% of its crude oil requirements from the West Asia, and Saudi Arabia is the top source of the crude oil for Indian economy. So the disruption of crude oil supply in Saudi Arabia may in turn adversely impact the India's energy security. Meanwhile, in order to compensate the disruption of the crude oil, Saudi Arabia has promised that it would export its reserves. And going forward, the security situation in West Asia is set to worsen. Already the United States of America has leveled accusations against Iran for carrying out the drone attacks on Saudi Arabia. Further, the Saudi Arabia-led coalition can launch retaliatory attacks against the Shia Houthi rebels, leading to worsening security situation in Yemen. The article that we have discussed is a news in transition. Let us wait and watch as to how the security situation in West Asia would evolve in future. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 1. The title of the article is Gooseberry Candy Rescues the Assam's Nutrition Drive. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Issues relating to Development and Management of Health. Anemia is considered to be a medical condition that is characterized by less number of healthy RBCs to carry oxygen to the different organs of the body. So when the tissues do not receive an adequate amount of oxygen, many organs and functions are affected. Anemia in case of pregnant women can suppress their immunity, and it can also prove fatal in some of the cases. With respect to anemia in children, it affects their overall physical growth as well as the cognitive performance. Hence, in order to reduce the cases of anemia among the pregnant women as well as children, Iron and folic acid tablets are supplied through the network of the Anganwadis in the villages. Now, this particular article here is in a form of a case study of a successful nutrition intervention in the Hailakandi district of Assam. In this particular district, almost around 47% of the women are suffering from anemia. This particular district also has a high number of children below the age of 5 years who are suffering from anemia. Hence, in order to address this particular problem in the Hailakandi district, earlier the district administration used to provide the iron and folic acid tablets to the pregnant women and the children. However, these iron and folic acid tablets were not consumed by the targeted population because of the wrong perception, wherein the people in the district believed that the consumption of these tablets will either kill them or make them incapable of conceiving. In response, the district administration has come up with the innovative idea of introducing the Amla Gur candies along with a dosage of salt. Now, the Amla or the gooseberry is considered to be quite rich in the vitamin C as well as antioxidants, whereas gur or the jaggery is considered to be rich in iron, vital vitamins as well as minerals. So the idea here is if the women and children avoid the iron and folic acid tablets, then they can at least get the necessary iron, vitamins and minerals by consuming the Amla Gur candies. Now, this particular successful nutrition intervention has been made possible under the National Nutrition Mission, also known as the Poshan Abhiyan. It is to be noted that the Poshan Abhiyan has been launched by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. This particular mission seeks a convergence of various schemes and programs implemented by the Government of India. Some of these schemes and programs include the Integrated Child Development Scheme, the National Health Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, Midday Meal Program, etc. This particular mission is implemented by an executive committee which is headed by the secretary in the Ministry of Women and Child Development. More importantly, please note that the Government of India is presently celebrating the month of September 2019 as the National Poshan Ma. Throughout the month of September, the government seeks to bring about a behavioral change in the mindset of the people towards nutrition by enhancing their awareness level. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Vulture Culture, How the Bird Was Saved from Extinction. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Biodiversity. During late 1990s, the vulture population in India had declined by almost around 99%. In response, the vulture conservation and breeding centers were established in India. Subsequently, there has been increase in the population of vultures because of the vulture conservation and breeding centers. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand all the aspects related to the vultures. Presently, in case of India, there are around 9 vulture species. And out of these 9 vulture species which have been shown in this particular table, the long-billed vulture, the white-rump vulture, slender-billed vulture and the red-headed vulture are considered to be critically endangered species according to the IUCN classification. And please note that out of the 9 vulture species, only the long-billed vulture, white-rump vulture and the slender-billed vulture have been categorized under the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, whereas the other vulture species have been put under the Schedule 4 of the Wildlife Protection Act. The significance of the vultures is that these vultures they feed on the dead bodies of the animals and hence keep the environment clean. The decline in the vulture population was first reported in the Keoladeo National Park, which is located in the state of Rajasthan. And the main cause for the decline in the vulture population was with respect to the administration of the diclofenac drug, which was used to treat the inflammation in the cattle. So when the vultures used to feed on the cattle which were administered with the diclofenac drug, these vultures used to suffer the kidney failure leading to their death. Apart from the diclofenac drug, other reasons for the decline in the vulture population are the slow breeding, the loss of habitat as well as the prey base. With respect to the vulture conservation efforts undertaken by the Government of India, 9 vulture conservation and breeding centers have been set up across India. wherein the Jatayu Vulture Conservation and Breeding Center located in Pinjore, Haryana is considered to be the Asia's first vulture conservation and breeding center. Apart from that, the Jatayu Vulture Conservation and Breeding Center was also in the news in the year 2016 because it had released the captive bred Himalayan Griffon vultures into the wild. Apart from that, certain areas in the country have been declared as the vulture safety zones. The main objective of vulture safety zones is to establish the diclofenac free zones in 100 to 150 kilometer radius around the vulture colonies. Further, vulture restaurants have also been set up so as to make available the diclofenac free food to the vultures. A platform of regional and international organizations has been launched known as SAVE, which stands for Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction. And lastly, the government of India has banned the administration of diclofenac to the cattle and it has been replaced by a much safer drug known as the meloxicam. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Survey of India to deploy 300 drones for mapping the country. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Current Events of National Importance. Now, this particular article here highlights that Survey of India, the nodal agency under the Department of Science and Technology, which has been entrusted with the responsibility of preparing maps in India, has recently started a new project. Under this particular project, the Survey of India is set to prepare the digital map of India in the next 2 years. It was nearly 200 years ago that the British surveyors George Everest and William Lambton had scientifically measured the entire length and breadth of India. And since then, these physical maps have been updated by the Survey of India on a periodical basis. Now, the idea of Survey of India is to prepare the digital maps for the entire India by using around 300 drones. Under this particular project, the Survey of India has already set up 3 digital centers across India so as to generate the digital topographical database. And this particular project has already been initiated in states such as Maharashtra, Karnataka as well as Haryana. Now coming to the significance of this particular project, presently the Survey of India is maintaining the maps of the resolution of 1:2500, which means to say 1 centimeter on the map corresponds to almost around 2500 on the ground. And these maps presently maintained by the Survey of India are considered to be of the lower resolution. So once a digital map for India is ready, we would be able to have a map of a higher resolution of 1:500. That means to say 1 centimeter on the map would correspond to around 500 centimeter on the ground. So because of the higher resolution of the digital maps, these maps would be considered to be more accurate as well as precise as compared to the Google Maps or the GPS based maps. And lastly, it is expected that once this particular project gets completed, it will help in the digitization of land records in India. Now, based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We shall be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The first question here is, consider the following statements related to the fundamental rights. The first statement here is, the fundamental rights are permanent and sacrosanct since they cannot be amended by the parliament. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because the parliament has the power to amend the fundamental rights. However, as ruled by the Supreme Court of India, the fundamental rights can be amended without affecting any changes to the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. The second statement reads as, all the fundamental rights can be suspended during the operation of national emergency. Now even this particular statement here is wrong. This is because the fundamental rights provided under Article 20 and Article 21 cannot be suspended during the operation of national emergency. So the correct answer to this particular question is D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Now coming to the second question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the GDP estimation in India. The first statement here is, it is estimated by the National Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. It is to be noted that earlier the GDP used to be estimated by the Central Statistical Office. However, the Central Statistical Office has got merged with the National Sample Survey Office so as to form the National Statistical Office, and presently the GDP estimation is done by the National Statistical Office, and hence this particular statement here is correct. The second statement reads as the contribution of the unorganized sector is not accounted in the GDP calculation. As we have discussed, the second statement here is wrong. So accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is one only. Now coming to third question, the question here is which of the following vulture species in India have been declared as critically endangered according to IUCN? And as we have discussed before, both long-billed vulture as well as slender-billed vulture have been declared as critically endangered according to the IUCN classification. So if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is 1 and 2 only. Now coming to last question, the question here is in which among the following countries are the Upkaik and Kores oil fields located? And as we have discussed, the answer to this particular question is D, that is Saudi Arabia. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day.